This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your daily recap of the information that affects Iowa's farmers, producers, and consumers, right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning broadcast team of Dustin Hoffman and Riley Smith. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Riley Smith.
Well, good day and welcome to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Riley Smith. Today is Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022. We're so glad you can join us today. In today's episode, I talk with DEKALB Asgrow technical agronomist Andrew Penney with a crop update for the state of Iowa. We also have a look at that ag weather outlook, but first, let's run down the markets.
It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net.
Well, we're at the close for another day in the ag marketplace, and for a bit of analysis, we go to Jim McCormick of agmarket.net. First off, Jim, what are we seeing going on in the grain markets?
I think the key word is volatility right now. Some extreme volatility we saw today. I would argue the markets overnight were higher, then they were lower. Then this morning they kind of broke really hard, had a little bit of recovery. A lot of this has to do with weather, plain and simple. The GFS model, that is the American model, continues to argue it is going to be very warm, very dry in the Western Corn Belt. Temperatures in the 90s, maybe even into the 100s, and just not a whole lot of rain west of the Mississippi River over the next 2 weeks. Now, the European model is not quite as aggressive on the heat, and it's definitely a little bit more aggressive bringing rain in, at least into portions of Iowa at this point in time. So I think you could probably argue the European model is a little bit too wet. The American model is probably a little bit too dry. And that's why we're getting a lot of volatility. The corn market was under pressure most session, did come back late in the day. Beans are going to end the session lower, Riley, but quite a bit off the lows. Like I said, I think it's a little bit of short covering maybe into the close today, certainly because they're a little bit worried about what the European model will say when that run starts this afternoon. The wheat market was under pressure all session long, as it does look like we're going to get some grain out of the Ukraine, and that seems to be keeping that wheat market at least a little bit on its defensive near term.
Right, and with the markets kind of getting back to more modest numbers, especially with some of the drops, getting to single digits or just in the teens, is a lot of that just kind of coming back and reeling in after a little bit of a kind of intense reaction we had earlier this week?
Well, I think what you're trying to do right now, the market right now is, I'd argue it's a little bit more of a consolidation mode. If you look at the hard break we had a couple weeks ago versus the spike high last week, we're kind of in the middle of that range. And, we're in a situation where, right now, I think we're trying to decide what type of crop size we have, not just here in the United States, but around the world. Europe's dealing with a lot of heat and a lot of dryness issues. We think their crop's getting a little bit smaller. We're also looking at U.S. crops being getting a little bit smaller. We get a USDA outlook or USDA meeting next week that's going to give a refreshed look of yields. I don't anticipate a whole lot of adjustments on this report. I think the adjustments will come in on the September and later reports. But, it's going to be very critical, folks, because plain and simple, the national bean yield right now is 51.5 bushels an acre. If the national yield would fall below 50 or lower, plain and simple, the bean carryout, instead of being around 230 million bushels, is going to fall down to about 100 million, essentially down to pipeline levels. If the corn yield, which is currently running at 177, matching the best crop ever, if that yield would fall down to 174, if you don't make any kind of demand revisions, essentially ration out demand, you drop your carryout down to $1 billion, which in essence is pipeline level. So if our crop shrinks, then the world's going to count on Europe's crop shrinking. Then that forces the crop to look at what's going to happen in South America, which obviously hasn't even started planning. So the next few weeks' weather still is going to have a huge determining factor of price action.
All right, and what are we seeing on the other side of the marketplace in the livestock complex?
In the livestock market, the hog market was a little bit choppy today. The spot month August continues to find support on cutouts and all that. The deferred contract's a little bit more choppy. Cattle market also continuing to work its way higher. I think counter seasonally. The reality is the price of gas has dropped quite a bit. I think consumer demand is still staying a little bit stronger than what people were thinking. But overall, in the broad picture, Riley, you're looking at a sideways market in the livestock.
Right, and of course, we're still in that grilling season demand, but we're getting towards the end of it as well. Does that usually wind down kind of after Labor Day weekend? Is that about the time frame?
Well, that's where times to do it. 10 times, you typically, they used to argue the dog days of summer. You tend to see the demand for beef and, kind of wind down. But I think after, 2 years of, COVID, people being locked up, I think you're seeing the summer demand extend a little bit longer than what people think. I've talked to several customers who actually have been on vacation in several parts around the country and said it didn't really matter where you go. The hotels are full, the restaurants are full. So I think that's a good sign that maybe that summer demand is going to stay long a little bit longer than normal. Like I said, traditionally, once we get past Labor Day, it tends to die down a little bit. But I think you got to look for a pretty much optimistic season. I think, football season's going to be coming around pretty quick. You see all that tailgating and all that. So hopefully that'll keep the support for this market there.
All right, Jim. Well, lots of great information today. And for those of our listeners and our watchers who would like to learn more and get in touch with the folks at agmarket.net, how can they do that?
You can reach me directly at 815-665-0461 or reach any of the Ag Market team members at 844-424-6758. And be sure to go to agmarket.net to sign up for our research.
All right, Jim, it was great catching up with you today, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
That again was Jim McCormick of agmarket.net. We'll go ahead and take a look at how those numbers close. That's courtesy of the folks at Bar Chart. At the close, September corn is up 1/4 cent at 5.91 1/2. December corn up 2 even at 5.96 1/4. August soybeans down 11 1/4 at 15.58 even. November soybeans down 16 3/4 at 13.69 3/4. Soybean meal down 2.80 at 4.31.40. Soy oil down 51 cents at 68.82. Chicago wheat is down 11 even at 7.63 3/4. Minneapolis spring wheat up 2 even at 8.75 1/4. Kansas City hard red wheat down 6 3/4 at 8.35 1/2, and September oats down 10 1/2 at 4.10 1/2. On the Merc, August live cattle up 132 at 137.90. August feeders up 122 at 179.35. August lean hogs up 115 at 121 even. Pork cutout down 47 cents at 106.67, and Class 3 milk down 34 at 20.09. And that's been a check of the Ag Market Recap here on Ag Matters PM. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soy Checkoff. When we come back, I talk with DEKALB technical agronomist Andrew Penney. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
Welcome back to Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Riley Smith. Well, the weather's been getting hot and hotter, which is putting some stress on crops around the state. This is compounded in the areas that have already seen drought conditions as well. DEKALB Asgrow technical agronomist Andrew Penney provided us an update on the current crop conditions in Iowa.
Yeah, Riley. So it's been an interesting year. I feel like the new normal is just a wide range of environmental conditions. Central Iowa, we went from extremely saturated to, we're not under terribly dry conditions, but there was a period where we definitely needed rain. So we definitely had, two extremes in a short period of time. And then, you go up to areas like Northwest Iowa, they're in pretty bad need of rain in spots. So, looking at the crops, there's definitely a wide range of, how the crops are looking when it comes to both corn and soybeans. I feel like for the most part, soybeans are probably looking a little worse, depending on, I think row width makes a big difference this year. But yeah, I think the one thing I've been talking to with people about and, trying to set expectations, especially in some of those, 30-inch soybeans, for maximum yield potential to occur, we like full canopy at R1, and a lot of fields just weren't even close to that. So I think that gives you a good feel for, kind of where we're sitting with some of those late planted soybeans. Despite these drought conditions, Penney said we could still see great yields as evidenced by last year's crop. And, I think there's, like I said, there's areas that definitely need rain, but, I think one of the biggest takeaways from last year is we were dry last year and we were pretty droughty in certain areas, and yet we still had a lot of the state and a lot of growers that had the highest yields they've ever had. So, I think one of the biggest takeaways from last year is that we know that corn and especially soybeans just don't like wet feet. And so, even though we're dry, I think there's areas that are getting timely rains, and there are areas that definitely need rain right now. But, I think there's still, from what I've seen, there's still a lot of really good looking crops. You get outside central Iowa where they weren't, completely saturated. There's some really good looking crops in southeast Iowa, east Iowa, definitely southwest Iowa. So still a lot of potential, and same with beans. Some of those growers that got beans in early, definitely 15-inch rows. I think we'll see a difference this year just because of the late planting in some areas. So I still think there's a lot of potential, but there are going to be issues, especially in corn when it comes to nitrogen in some of those areas that got that had a lot of rain early on.
As we've mentioned many times recently, most of the rainfall we get comes in the form of severe weather events. However, we need to strike a balance where we get enough rain while avoiding most of the intense damage. Penney said the derechos caused a bit of wind damage to crops in the northern part of the state, especially with the surprise storms that we saw overnight a few weeks ago.
Yeah, no, there was definitely some damage. We had that first one that went through. Boy, hopefully my timeline's correct, but I think it was about 3 weeks ago, 3.5. And then we had that second one come through kind of unexpectedly overnight. That was a week after that, roughly. And so, kind of similar trajectory or pattern that the derecho in 2020 had. It seems like those winds coming from northwest Iowa to southeast Iowa, that's kind of where the area that was hit. And so, that first one that went through, we kind of lucked out, I think, because it was still, the sun was still out. We were close to dark. It was later in the daytime when that wind came through, and that's always a good thing because there's less trigger pressure in a plant when the sun's out. And so when that second one came through unexpectedly at during the night, we saw a little bit more green snap because simply because there's more trigger pressure in a plant at night when those stomata are closed, and so that was a little bit more damaging. But there were areas, as you get further northwest in the state where that first storm, definitely impacted some corn. But the good thing, there was a lot of lodging. And so, we were early enough in the developmental stages that, that corn stood up pretty well.
Penney also provided an update on the pest and disease issues we've seen so far this year.
Yeah, so rootworm has continued, from 2020, 2021. We're continuing to see those hot spots with pretty high populations and some pretty good feeding in some areas. Tar spot, that's been on a topic of discussion here the last year or two. And, it's popped up. We had some counties confirmed maybe 2 to 2.5 weeks ago, roughly, give or take. And, I just haven't seen it spread. So I think you got to go closer or, move east before it becomes more common. But, I think that the dry week will probably delay some of the disease, or the dry warm week that we're, potentially expecting next week could delay some of that disease progression. But, all it takes, especially with a disease like tar spot, all it takes is a few days of moisture and humidity and leaf wetness to flare up pretty quick. So, yeah, so I think the biggest topics this year are still, corn rootworm pressure and tar spot.
One of the most obnoxious perennial pests is the Japanese beetle. No matter what happens, it seems that we always see a huge explosion of them in the middle of the summer. Penney said even the larva can cause some real damage to young crops.
Yeah, no, Japanese beetles are a tricky one. I see them every year. It seems like no matter what kind of environmental conditions we have, they're always around. Last year there was an area where I could dig corn plants early on and still find, before the adults Japanese beetles emerged from the soil, I could find 1 to 2 the white grubs in the soil with each plant that I dug. So, last year I was expecting just an infestation in this area, and it never got to be too bad. So, it's one of those things where, yeah, Japanese beetles are always around. I deal with them on our farm, but there's spots where, it seems like they're more prominent and consistent as far as their impact on corn. And yeah, they just really like to feed on those silks. So if you get high enough population, they can definitely impact, pollination and similar situation in soybeans. I've already heard of a few fields this year that people have sprayed just because the Japanese beetle pressure is so high, or population so high, that they're feeding on those plants, and it's noticeable from the road. So when you get that kind of feeding going on, it can be pretty impactful and detrimental to soybean growth and yields.
Penney added that the late planting in particular will have an impact on this year's soybean crop.
I think the biggest one biggest one is probably some of the late planting that went on, and then on top of that, the saturated soils, drown out spots. There's a decent amount of replants in the central part of the state, and so I think that's going to continue to have the biggest impact on what we see as far as yields. Again, going back to kind of setting the stage, we could have a good growing conditions in August. Get some of those rains that we always like to see when it comes to high soybean yields. But, like I've been telling people, we could still get that and still see some pretty decent yields. But I think because of some of those setbacks we saw early on from the, the late planting dates, lack of canopy closure at R1, and some of the yet to be seen or determined root rots and diseases that might have set in early, I think we could have seen more potential bushels come out of the fields if we didn't encounter some of those early season problems.
With varying conditions, different regions have different needs. Penney explained what he thinks each region needs for the rest of the growing season.
I think the biggest thing, central Iowa, definitely be looking for, nitrogen deficiency, with some of those, with the saturated soils that we saw early on, I think we're going to see a pretty good response from growers at side dress. And anytime we start lacking or, being short on nitrogen, potassium, some of the macros, and obviously micros matter, but, that can definitely impact stock quality and yield. So that's probably my main concern in corn right now is just, in the areas where there was plenty of moisture, nitrogen deficiency and stock quality. I think some of the areas right now, there's a lot of fields that are tasseling and pollinating right now. As you go to Northwest Iowa and some of the areas that are a little bit drier, pollen is extremely impacted by, the higher temperatures, whereas your silks are more impacted by drier conditions. So, the droughty conditions that we're experiencing in some of the parts, Northwest Iowa, Southwest, Southeast Iowa, that can impact silk development, silk elongation, and, it can really impact the anthesis silking interval between, pollen shed and silking. So that's probably my main concern in the drier areas is just, the whole pollination process, because we have about a 2-week window before and after pollination and fertilization where we can still, negatively impact seed set and the number of kernels we'll eventually get to harvest.
That again was DEKALB Asgrow technical agronomist Andrew Penney. As for right now, let's go ahead and take a look at that ag weather outlook. Well, today was not as hot as it could have been, considering that it could have been 100 degrees and it was just around 90 instead. We had some rain earlier this morning, but that seems to have headed off for a while, so let's go ahead and take a look at what the National Weather Service has in store for the next 24 hours. As you can see from the National Weather Service, it's going to be cooler than we thought. Today will be a little cooler with showers and thunderstorms likely across much of the state, highs ranging from the upper 80s to lower 90s. Tonight, the skies will clear throughout the night and we'll have cooler temps with those lows ranging from the upper 50s to upper 60s. And tomorrow, we'll see mostly sunny skies and slightly cooler temps. Of course, that's just cooler than the triple digits we saw the other day. Those highs will range from the mid-80s to about 90 degrees. Looking at the affiliate weather map, as you can see for tomorrow, Cherokee will be sunny with a high of 86, Shenandoah sunny and a high of 90, Des Moines sunny and 89, Albia sunny and 88, Waterloo sunny and 85, and Clinton looking to be sunny as well with a high of 85. For more detailed forecasts in your part of the state, make sure to check in with your local Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network affiliate. And that's been a check of the Ag Weather Outlook, and that also brings us to the end of this episode of Ag Matters PM. You can find all of our content on our website at iowaagnet.com. You can also follow us on social media at Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And you can find all of our video content as well as previous episodes of AM/PM on our YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell to see when those videos go live. Don't forget as well our free Twice Daily Market podcast on Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and Podbean. From the IARN studios in Des Moines, I'm Riley Smith. On behalf of Avery Haskell and Dustin Huffman, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.